Most people believe the greatest threats in life come from powerful enemies, unexpected failures, or difficult circumstances. They spend years preparing for battles outside themselves while ignoring the battlefield within. Yet the strongest prison has never been built with walls. It is built from fear, doubt, uncontrolled emotion, and the constant need for approval. A person who cannot master these forces will always remain vulnerable, no matter how much wealth, influence, or talent they possess. The world quickly discovers where their confidence breaks, where their patience ends, and where their emotions become stronger than their judgment. Once those weaknesses are visible, they become easy to influence, easy to provoke, and easy to distract from what truly matters. The first ruthless lesson is understanding that mental strength is not created when life becomes easy. It is created by refusing to surrender control of your inner world when life becomes difficult. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to strengthen your discipline instead of weakening your resolve. Every setback becomes evidence that your character is being tested rather than your destiny being denied. This single change in perspective separates those who constantly react from those who quietly remain in command of themselves. Ideas commonly associated with Machiavelli emphasize that influence begins with self-command before it ever reaches other people. A leader who cannot govern their own thoughts will eventually be governed by the opinions, emotions, and expectations of everyone around them. Imagine someone whose mood changes every time they receive criticism. Their confidence rises with praise and disappears with rejection. Although they believe they are making independent decisions, they are actually allowing strangers to control their emotional state. Compare that with someone who listens carefully, considers criticism objectively, accepts useful lessons, and calmly ignores empty insults. Both hear the same words, yet only one remains free. The difference is not intelligence alone. It is emotional discipline. The mentally untouchable individual understands that other people's opinions belong to them, while their own peace remains a personal responsibility. This lesson also requires abandoning the constant search for validation. Many people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to convince others they are capable, intelligent, or worthy. They explain every decision, defend every mistake, and chase approval that never truly satisfies them. Unfortunately, the more desperately someone seeks recognition, the more dependent they become upon it. Real confidence grows in the opposite direction. It develops quietly through consistent action rather than public admiration. Every promise you keep to yourself strengthens your character. Every difficult habit you maintain without applause becomes evidence that your discipline no longer depends on external reward. Over time, this private consistency creates a calm confidence that cannot easily be shaken because it was never built upon temporary praise in the first place. Mental resilience also transforms the way you experience adversity. Failure stops becoming proof of inadequacy and instead becomes information. Rejection stops becoming personal and instead becomes redirection. Betrayal stops becoming a permanent wound and instead becomes a lesson in judgment. This shift does not eliminate pain, but it prevents pain from controlling your future decisions. You begin asking wiser questions. Instead of wondering why something happened to you, you begin asking what it can teach you. Instead of seeking revenge, you seek understanding. Instead of allowing disappointment to define your identity, you allow discipline to redefine your direction. As this foundation grows stronger, people notice something difficult to explain. You become calmer during conflict, more patient under pressure, and less interested in proving yourself through unnecessary words. Your confidence comes from mastery rather than appearance, and your decisions become increasingly guided by principles instead of emotions. That is where the journey toward becoming mentally untouchable truly begins, not by controlling the world around you, but by ruling the only kingdom that has always belonged to you, your own mind. The second ruthless lesson begins with a truth that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Every person who gains influence over you first gains influence over your emotions. They do not need greater intelligence, superior strength, or higher status. They simply need to discover what consistently provokes you. Once they know what offends you, what frightens you, or what makes you desperate for approval, your decisions become increasingly predictable. This is why emotional control is not merely a personal virtue. It is a form of protection. A mind that reacts to every insult, every disappointment, and every unexpected obstacle gradually surrenders its freedom to circumstances beyond its control. The mentally untouchable individual understands that every emotional reaction should first pass through the filter of reason before becoming visible through words or actions. They refuse to allow temporary feelings to create permanent consequences. Instead of asking how they feel in a difficult moment, they ask what response will serve their long-term purpose. That single question transforms ordinary reactions into deliberate choices and slowly builds an inner stability that cannot easily be shaken by outside pressure. Ideas commonly associated with Machiavelli suggest that people reveal more about themselves during emotional moments than during careful conversation. Anger exposes priorities. Fear exposes insecurities. Jealousy exposes hidden desires. Impatience exposes weak discipline. Most individuals unknowingly announce these vulnerabilities every day because they react before they observe. The strategic thinker behaves differently. They watch first, understand second, and respond only after the situation becomes clear. This patience creates an invisible advantage because while others reveal their intentions through impulsive behavior, the disciplined observer continues collecting information without exposing unnecessary weaknesses of their own. They recognize that silence often teaches more than argument, and that calmness frequently accomplishes what force cannot. One of the greatest forms of emotional discipline is refusing to compete for validation. Many people exhaust themselves trying to prove their intelligence, defend their reputation, or win arguments that add no value to their lives. Every unnecessary battle consumes attention that could have been invested elsewhere. The mentally untouchable person understands that not every criticism deserves an answer, and not every misunderstanding requires correction. Sometimes allowing others to keep a mistaken opinion is far wiser than sacrificing peace to change it. Their confidence no longer depends upon universal agreement, because they have learned that self-respect is built internally rather than awarded by public approval. This quiet independence gradually removes one of the strongest tools manipulators possess: the ability to control someone through praise or criticism. Imagine two people facing the same public insult. One immediately responds with anger, attempting to defend every detail of their character. The argument grows larger, emotions intensify, and both leave feeling defeated. The second person listens without visible frustration, calmly evaluates whether the criticism contains anything useful, and quietly moves forward without unnecessary conflict. Weeks later, the first remains trapped in resentment while the second has already invested their energy into meaningful progress. The difference lies not in personality, but in discipline. One allowed another person's words to control their direction. The other refused to surrender that authority. As this lesson becomes part of your daily life, Emotional storms begin losing much of their influence. Delays no longer feel like disasters. Rejection becomes instruction rather than humiliation. Failure becomes education instead of identity. Gradually, your focus shifts away from controlling events and toward mastering your responses. That transformation creates genuine resilience because circumstances constantly change. But disciplined thinking remains dependable regardless of external conditions. People begin noticing that your calmness is not passive but intentional. Your patience is not hesitation but preparation, and your silence is not weakness but strength. That is the beginning of becoming mentally untouchable, because the individual who cannot be controlled through emotion becomes increasingly difficult to manipulate through anything else. The third ruthless lesson begins with a realization that separates ordinary minds from truly disciplined ones. The strongest people are not those who never experience betrayal, disappointment, or deception. They are the ones who refuse to let those experiences poison their judgment. Many individuals allow one painful event to reshape their entire personality. After being betrayed once, they stop trusting everyone. After failing once, they stop taking meaningful risks. After being criticized, they begin living according to the expectations of others instead of their own convictions. This is how the world quietly steals a person's freedom. It convinces them that protecting themselves requires becoming fearful, bitter, or emotionally closed. The mentally untouchable individual chooses a different path. They accept that pain is inevitable, but refuse to let it become their identity. Every difficult experience becomes a lesson rather than a life sentence. Instead of asking why someone disappointed them, they ask what the experience revealed about human nature, about their own judgment, and about the habits they need to strengthen. This perspective transforms suffering into wisdom and prevents temporary hardship from creating permanent weakness. Ideas commonly associated with Machiavelli emphasize that people should be understood through consistent actions rather than persuasive words. Promises are easily made during comfortable moments, but character reveals itself when circumstances become difficult. The mentally untouchable person observes patiently before placing complete trust in anyone. They understand that loyalty cannot be demanded, only demonstrated through time. This does not make them suspicious of every person they meet. Instead, it makes them careful. They allow trust to grow naturally through repeated evidence rather than emotional excitement. By doing so, they reduce unnecessary disappointment because their expectations are guided by observation instead of hope. They learn to admire integrity while preparing for human imperfection, recognizing that awareness provides stronger protection than blind optimism ever could. Another important part of this lesson is learning to separate your self-worth from the behavior of others. Many people secretly measure their value by how they are treated. When they are appreciated, they feel confident. When they are ignored, they feel insignificant. When someone leaves, they question their own worth. This creates emotional dependence because your identity becomes controlled by circumstances outside your influence. The mentally untouchable individual understands that another person's choices often reveal more about that person's priorities than about your value. They refuse to allow rejection to become proof of inadequacy. Instead, they continue developing themselves regardless of who chooses to stay or leave. This quiet confidence gradually removes the fear of abandonment because their foundation no longer depends upon constant acceptance from others. Imagine two friends experiencing the same betrayal. One spends years reliving the event, speaking about it repeatedly, allowing resentment to influence every future relationship. The other grieves honestly, studies what happened, accepts responsibility for any mistakes they made, and slowly rebuilds their life with greater wisdom. Neither escaped pain, but only one transformed pain into growth. The first remained imprisoned by memory. The second used memory as instruction. That difference determines whether adversity becomes a burden or an advantage. The mentally untouchable person understands that healing is not forgetting what happened. It is refusing to let what happened dictate every future decision. As this lesson becomes part of your thinking, you begin noticing profound changes. Bitterness slowly gives way to clarity. Fear gives way to preparation. Emotional dependence gives way to quiet independence. Instead of trying to avoid every disappointment, you develop the strength to face disappointment without losing yourself. This resilience makes manipulation increasingly difficult because fewer emotional wounds remain available for others to exploit. Your peace no longer depends on perfect circumstances or perfect people. It depends on your ability to respond with wisdom regardless of what life places before you. That is why true mental strength is never measured by how little suffering you experience, but by how much character you build from every challenge that attempts to break you. The fourth ruthless lesson begins with a truth that many people never accept until life forces them to. The greatest source of weakness is not failure, rejection, or hardship. It is dependence. The moment your happiness depends entirely on another person's approval, your confidence becomes fragile. The moment your peace depends on circumstances remaining comfortable, your mind becomes vulnerable to every unexpected change. Most people unknowingly surrender their freedom this way. They allow compliments to determine their confidence and criticism to determine their mood. They chase acceptance because they believe belonging is more valuable than authenticity. Gradually, they stop making decisions based on their own principles and begin making them according to what they think others expect. This quiet dependence slowly erodes character until they no longer recognize the difference between their true desires and the opinions they have spent years trying to satisfy. The mentally untouchable individual understands that real independence begins long before financial success or public recognition. It begins with the decision to stop allowing outside circumstances to define inner stability. They understand that while relationships, careers, and opportunities are valuable, none of them should become the foundation of their identity. A foundation built on anything outside your control will eventually be shaken. A foundation built on discipline, integrity, and self-respect remains steady even when everything else changes. Ideas commonly associated with Machiavelli suggest that those who remain emotionally independent become far more difficult to influence. Manipulation succeeds when someone discovers what you fear losing most. If approval becomes your greatest need, praise and criticism become tools that guide your behavior. If comfort becomes your highest priority, fear becomes an easy weapon against you. The mentally untouchable person recognizes these patterns and deliberately weakens their dependence upon them. They practice standing by difficult decisions even when those decisions are unpopular. They become comfortable disappointing people when necessary instead of sacrificing their values for temporary harmony. This does not make them cold or indifferent. It simply means they understand that lasting respect grows from consistency, not from constant agreement. One of the strongest expressions of independence is learning to enjoy solitude without feeling incomplete. Many people fear being alone because silence forces them to face thoughts they have spent years avoiding. They fill every empty moment with conversation, entertainment, or distraction because stillness feels uncomfortable. Yet solitude offers something no crowd can provide. It creates space for honest reflection. It allows you to evaluate your choices without outside influence. It strengthens your ability to enjoy your own company instead of constantly seeking reassurance from others. The mentally untouchable individual does not isolate themselves from the world, but neither do they fear temporary distance from it. They understand that clarity often grows in quiet places where distractions lose their influence and self-awareness becomes stronger. Imagine two individuals facing the same period of loneliness. One immediately searches for anyone who can remove the discomfort, accepting unhealthy relationships simply to avoid being alone. The other uses the same season to strengthen discipline, develop new skills, examine personal weaknesses, and rediscover meaningful purpose. Months later, the first remains emotionally dependent, while the second has become more confident precisely because they learned they could rely on themselves. Neither escaped loneliness entirely, but only one transformed it into strength. The difference was not circumstance, it was perspective. As this lesson becomes part of your daily life, your confidence gradually changes. You stop fearing rejection because your value no longer depends on universal acceptance. You stop chasing attention because your purpose becomes more important than recognition. Your relationships improve because they are built upon genuine respect instead of emotional dependence. Most importantly, your peace becomes increasingly difficult to disturb because it is protected by principles rather than by changing circumstances. That is the quiet strength of becoming mentally untouchable. When your identity no longer depends upon what can easily be taken away, you discover a freedom that no criticism, disappointment, or temporary hardship can ever truly destroy. The final ruthless lesson is the one that gives meaning to every lesson before it. Becoming mentally untouchable is not about defeating everyone around you. It is about reaching a point where very little outside you has the power to disturb what exists within you. Many people spend their lives chasing control over circumstances while ignoring the only form of control that truly belongs to them. They try to manage other people's opinions, predict every outcome, and avoid every disappointment, believing peace will finally arrive once the world behaves the way they want it to. But the world has never made such a promise. Change is inevitable. Loss is unavoidable. Criticism will appear no matter how carefully you live. The person who waits for perfect conditions before feeling confident will wait forever. The mentally untouchable individual understands that lasting peace is created internally and protected daily through disciplined thinking. They no longer ask life to become easier. Instead, they become stronger, wiser, and more adaptable with every challenge they encounter. Every obstacle becomes another opportunity to strengthen the habits that no external force can easily take away. This mindset transforms uncertainty from a source of fear into a field where resilience is quietly developed. Ideas commonly associated with Machiavelli remind us that genuine influence begins with understanding reality rather than resisting it. Wise individuals accept that human nature contains ambition, self-interest, loyalty, generosity, and betrayal all at once. They neither idolize people nor condemn humanity completely. Instead, they observe patiently and act with careful judgment. Because they expect imperfection, they are rarely shocked when it appears. Their expectations remain balanced, allowing them to appreciate trustworthy people without becoming emotionally dependent upon them. This balance protects both compassion and caution. They remain kind without becoming naive, confident without becoming arrogant, and patient without becoming passive. Such balance is difficult to achieve, yet it is precisely this discipline that makes manipulation increasingly ineffective. The final lesson is to build an identity that cannot be purchased, threatened, or borrowed. Many individuals unknowingly define themselves by temporary achievements, financial success, social status, or public admiration. While these things may bring satisfaction, none of them are permanent. When identity depends entirely upon external success, every setback begins to feel like the loss of self. The mentally untouchable person chooses a stronger foundation. Their confidence grows from integrity, self-respect, and disciplined habits that remain valuable regardless of changing circumstances. Success becomes something they enjoy rather than something they require in order to feel worthy. Failure becomes an event rather than an identity. This quiet independence creates extraordinary stability because external victories no longer determine internal value. Imagine two people facing the same unexpected loss. One immediately concludes that everything they built has disappeared and that their future is beyond repair. The other experiences the same disappointment but refuses to let it define the rest of their life. They preserve their routines, strengthen their character, continue learning, and patiently begin rebuilding what circumstances removed. Months later, one remains trapped by despair while the other has already created new opportunities from the same painful beginning. The difference was not luck or talent. It was the foundation upon which each person had built their identity. One relied almost entirely upon circumstances. The other relied upon character. As every lesson comes together, a deeper truth begins to emerge. Observation teaches wisdom. Emotional discipline protects judgment. Resilience transforms adversity into growth. Independence removes the fear of rejection. Integrity creates lasting confidence. Together, these qualities shape a mind that cannot easily be controlled by praise, fear, anger, or disappointment. Such a person no longer spends life reacting to every change in the world around them. They move with purpose, think with clarity, and remain steady when others lose direction. That is the essence of becoming mentally untouchable. It is not the absence of emotion or hardship, but the presence of unwavering self-mastery. When you rule your own mind with patience, discipline, and wisdom, you discover a form of strength that no betrayal can steal, no failure can destroy, and no circumstance can ever truly overcome.